They took my mama and made her white, so much so that she hates herself. They took my mama and made her white, and she became ashamed of her colour. Ashamed to be black, she favoured white or light skin. Anything too black, don't have anything to do with it, said my mama, as she reverently watches and admires the Queen. Her white Christ is on the wall, all blonde-haired, blue-eyed and smiling, and my black-white mama worships reverently. No room for black visual images, no room for African gods, no room for African religion, because my black mama's white through and through. To New York I went one summer, a black Madonna and child I did bring for my mama. No thanks did I get, no exclamation of delight, not even, "How are that you bring?" No words were uttered by my parent to say, "That's an interesting picture you have there." I feel so sad for my mama, because my mama's going to go to her grave and she'll still be white through and through.
Oral history is about finding out what you didn't know.
I grew up immersed in storytelling and storytellers, and I didn't know, but I think that in part it had something to do with the way that the East End had its relationships with the sea, and the kinds of stories that I heard and the ways of storytelling. I think that they were kind of like the lowest common denominator, really. You would have people who could stand and be eloquent, but they were ordinary people, and that has stayed with me. I've always been interested in ordinary voices, and it's been refined over time into the notion of, or the awareness that ordinary people do extraordinary things, and ordinary people are the way to understand, for me anyway, the big iconic chapters that are presented, like when you do schools history and all of those kinds of things. You can learn about the British building the railway, but if you actually find out navvies' stories, or the displaced communities, the people who fed them, and all of those kinds of things from the bottom up, then you understand how something as iconic as a railway being laid really gets done. And you can transpose that, or I transpose that example into lots of other things, which essentially is what Turning Point is. So we're dealing with a moment just after the First World War, one of those big sort of like watersheds of heritage.
They've inspired me to work with memory as a living thing and as a process, and seeing how there are many ways of working with people and presenting stories that are not necessarily linear, and they've inspired me to value the agency that people have with sharing their stories in the places that they want to share them, the objects or environments that they relate their stories to, and giving us the power of cherishing them, and also finding spaces for them to be archived in an ethical way, stored in an ethical way. And yes, that's what I've learned, and that's what I've enjoyed.
Records, what do you define as an archival record? The beauty of this workshop is we're creating a record while interacting with history of multiple generations ago in a creative format. So it's not the very traditional way of how you would go. Usually people do recordings and then create a film. Yeah, we're drawing inspiration from a film to create history. So we have the youth from Sweet Patootie, but also from the Youth Forum within BCA, who are learning how to do oral histories, how to transcribe these oral histories, and how do these then feed into an archive. So it's actually a skill training course for you. After this course, if you work under someone or work somewhere else and practice these skills again, you can be qualified as an oral historian. when you're recording history, when you do an oral history especially, it's never relying on just one source. You do multiple sources in order to create an evidence of the masses. Remember how I told you, history is written from the elite, it's written from the kings, it's written from the prime ministers, never the people. Right now within people. And one thing I can draw from that is the people have never spoken to each other. So there's a lot of layers of history where we're missing, and it's going to happen with today's work as well. I'm Indian. So for me, I'll say a lot of this history is history that I'm learning after coming to the UK. Because in India, even though we studied British colonial rule, this part of history wasn't taught to us. Whereas my reflection coming to the UK is the part of Black history or Black British history is not even taught in the schools here. So for me, this was lovely to see in the sense that a lot of this I can relate to, because Indian labourers went through the same, Indian soldiers went through the same. So a lot of themes I could relate to. Half of the trauma that each of the four characters had was actually coming from its own community. And that's not to blame the community, that is the work of colonialism.
The stories being told are, it seems in a way like to ground the narrator and also to kind of make their reality congruent with what they're actually facing. So it's like, it's a means of escapism but also grounding.
No story is just individual, but it exists in the moment that it's shared or enacted, and it gives agency to the people that have experienced it, or the different spaces, moments in time that were talked about that become alive, and there's meaning in the way this was told, and it creates an archive, I guess.
This is the second time I'm watching the film, and with the four characters, and it was interesting that you said that the characters all had something in common, I think it was, and they hadn't met each other, and that was quite similar to the way that it was recorded. All the voices, all the acting and everything else was done in isolation, so we don't know who the other voices are. So it's just interesting that you should point that out and it should come out like that.
Aside from like the general dimension of us watching the movie and hearing the story that way, within the film there's also like the characters telling the story to the community. That is a great way of like sharing our history and building community, even though there's also the negative sides of that with the shaming and the stigmatizing. Like in the first story, Cedric, like he was expressing visible signs of like what we would call PTSD now. Like he was shaking, he was crying, he was in distress, and like for your community to sort of shame and mock you in that way because of the mental toll that war takes on you, like that's a bit like that's probably the negative side of this storytelling aspect.
We are not who history has projected us to be. We have been robbed not just of our humanity but of our resources, and that continues to this day. Those resources, Africa isn't poor. Our resources continue to be exploited through imperialism for the use of European societies across the world. So we need to help to understand that and ensure that our children understand that so that they can hold their head high and be proud of who they are. We all have a responsibility to be part of that work, to change the way history is taught, is seen.
You've got the archived images, you've got the sound, you've got the acting, you've got the up-close zoom shots, which I found was like really quite moving. It really makes me feel like I'm there, I'm speaking to that person, and kind of grounding these histories in these lived experiences with these different characters.
As Garvey told us, a people without a knowledge of their own history, origin and culture are like a tree without roots, and we know a tree without roots is dead.
Technical term. It's really great to be here. It really is. It's great to share in and I suppose, reflect on your own observations and what you come from this. I'm sure that Verona must feel the same in the same way because of what we gave to make it and your perceptions and what you bring.
So tonight is all about celebrating the intergenerational oral history workshops that have been held at the Black Cultural Archives together with Peckham Planning. So we'll have a short film screening by Sweet Patootie Arts called Turning Point, which is the organisation that I'm here with. And we'll also see the youth kind of talk about the process throughout these workshops, present their work, their findings, their interviews through different kind of media such as like a short film, music, like a certain curated playlist, as well as just general presentations. There'll be a lot of discussion, I think, between members, comparing like the experience with these youths and the elders. We'll have lots of food as well to enjoy, some music in the background, and I think, yeah, it'll be a very fun evening. I'm excited.
Today's event is the final session of a series of workshops that we've been doing over the last almost a month and a half with our wonderful participants, Hala, Betsy, Juno, and Maria. Tony reached out to us and said, I have a wonderful idea, I have a film, I want to create something. So BCA then said, how about we take Peckham Platform, Sweet Patootie, and BCA and kind of bring three different groups together. So Peckham Platform have young individuals, we have the youth forum, we put out the invite. Individuals reached out saying we would like to get this kind of training. I then designed a 6-week workshop. From these different workshops where they learn different skill sets, at least some skill set will help them progress in their career. So whether they go to become an archivist, or oral historian, a transcriptionist, a creative co-producer, or just to encourage them to bring themselves more into the archive and realize that the archive is not a place for old documents, but a place for living history. So actually, we created living history through this project.
They took my mama and made her white.
I'm Des's daughter, his stepdaughter, Frankie. I know that he has really appreciated over the last few years trying to trace back his family tree, and so much of that has benefited from oral histories, from actually finding people on, what there is administratively recorded, and then speaking to them. He's been out to Jamaica a number of times to meet with people and learn more history, and the oral nature of it has pushed his knowledge further than any written record. Like, he'd find a written record and they'd be wildly inaccurate. He'd speak to someone 2 doors down, they'd be like, oh yeah, I know Sister B is this, that, other, whatever. And that's what's really broadened his horizons of that.
So a big round of applause for everyone who's participating.
Today, I was really nervous. I probably kept it a bit too short because as everyone else was speaking, I came up with like a lot more ideas I could have shared, but I was really happy to see my family and hear like Juno and Hala's input as well. I do dream big. I'd like to be an archivist. I'm sort of doing some work experience at BCA right now just to get a feel of what that's like. But doing the oral history interviews as well, that was really enlightening for me because I found like a new passion almost because of that one-to-one interaction with other people and like handling their stories. It's like really vulnerable. It feels like you have a lot of power and there's like, with great power comes great responsibility. So yeah, it's just knowing how to care for the person as well that you're interviewing, but also having your mind on something bigger too. So like the project anchored me, so during the interviews I knew we were working with the end goal in sight.
The entire experience was honestly refreshing. It was rejuvenating. I have never been able to participate in a project like this before. You know, I do different things like interviews and a little bit of transcription at uni, but never something that really touched my soul in such a way and allowed me to see like the impact we all have on each other and the way that all our histories intertwine.
I thought it was great interacting, especially with the young people, because obviously they are the next generation, and it's important to share stories with them and pass on that legacy, if you like, the baton, so that they can be inspired by the older people, their stories, to move forward and create new stories. I think for me it was about sharing my life story here. And letting them know about the kind of traumas and things we were subjected to when we came here. Because although things are rising up again in terms of racism and all of those kind of things in this country, when we came here it was terrible. You know, we were chased, things like kicking down the road and so on. So if you like, it was good for them to see that although things had settled and seemed resolved and quiet, it can resurface. So you literally always have to be on your guard and be aware of what's going on around you. I certainly learnt from the young people how much they had been impacted by the interviewing of the older people that were sharing their stories. I thought the films were great as well in terms of highlighting that legacy of what many of us are still experiencing, the knowledge, lack of knowledge of self, lack of knowledge of many aspects of who we really are as a people.